All right, good morning to you all. We are continuing our study of the book of Daniel. To those of you who have not been with us during this study, you've kind of found yourselves right in the middle of a history lesson. I apologize, but that is the nature of Daniel chapter 11. There's not really any other way around that. But I'll back up and give a little bit of review because we are just starting chapter 11 last week, and I want to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, including for those who were just not able to be with us last week. So last week we finished chapter 10, and in chapter 10 we see Daniel has this vision, and this vision crosses over multiple chapters. Basically from chapter 10 through chapter 12, these are all happening concurrently. These are all happening at the same time, one right after another. It's not, chapter 10 is one time frame at one place and then skips to another time in chapter 11 and another time in chapter 12, like we've seen in the past with Daniel. So this is all at once. This is kind of the last marathon of visions that Daniel witnesses is in these final three chapters of Daniel, chapters 10 through 12. So in chapter 10, he has a vision, and he sees this man. Most of your translations will describe it as a man with, this just great majesty, very similar to some of the descriptions of Christ we see in Revelation. But a lot of commentators think that this is not Christ. They think that this is an angel. Some will specifically say that this is Gabriel. Gabriel has been named in Daniel's chapter 8 and 9. He's not named here, and it's not referred to as the man that Daniel had seen before in his prior vision. So we don't necessarily know if this is an angel, and if so, who or which angel it is. But we do know that this angel is involved in a mission from God to direct basically the world powers. He's got some conflict that he talks about with the king of Persia, or say Prince of Persia, and that it was so important that Michael had to come in and basically help. I believe he's referring to Michael the archangel in that case. So there's a lot going on. And it's not God just kind of sitting on the sidelines watching these world powers kind of trade blows. God seems very much involved, which makes sense given the fact that we've seen these visions way before even now in Daniel that talk about the changes in the global dynamics. So it seems that God is very much being a part of this. We don't know exactly in what capacity or how he's manipulating things, but he is involved. We know that it's not just these things happen to be going on or just these special circumstances have come up. So that's basically where we are in chapter 10. And then Daniel chapter 11, where we'll be picking up this morning, Daniel is being told by this man of great majesty things that are going to transpire in the future, in Daniel's future, the past for us, but things are going to happen in the future, and he's basically going to be told, write these things down. This is information that the Jewish people are going to need to know so that they know the signs, they know the times for when the end times are coming. And when you hear the word end times, that phrasing, a lot of people think, the apocalypse, the final judgment. No, we're talking about the final age when Christ comes to the earth, establishes the church, and you have his kingdom established through the church. That's really the context of what we're talking about here. All of Daniel's visions are concerned with the time of Daniel through to the time of Christ. That is the context for that. There are a lot of commentators that go a lot of weird directions with various parts of Daniel's vision saying, this is talking about the rapture. This is talking about, the final judgment. That's not the context of which we see. So be very careful when you see those mentioned. I've kind of talked about that before, but that's just a background for those of you who have not been with us. So in chapter 11, we just got a few verses through, but I'm going to kind of walk through each of them, and I've updated my timeline now, so I've got a few more things on here. Now remember, Daniel is taken in about 606 BC, when he's one of the first wave of captives that is taken into Babylonian captivity by the Babylonians in this column right here. And then you have the Medes and Persians that take over later. Oh, my battery just died, I think. Oh, that's you. Oh, it's your fault. Okay, not mine. Okay, and then where we are now in Daniel chapters 10 through 12 is here in 536 BC. So we've progressed several years. Daniel's an old man by this point. Darius the Mede is probably not around anymore. It seems that Cyrus is ruling outright. The Persians have pretty much dominated their Mede counterparts, and time is going to go on. So where you pick up at the beginning of, I think we went through the first 4 verses. Verse 2 talks about, well, I'll just read it. It'll be faster to do that. Daniel chapter 11, verse 2 says, "Now then, I tell you the truth, 3 more kings will appear in Persia, and then a 4th, who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece." So he talks about 3 more kings, and Daniel is currently in the reign of Cyrus the Great, or Cyrus the Second. So 3 more kings. You have Cambyses the Second, Bardia, Darius the First, and then Xerxes the First. This is the same Xerxes we believe that is talked about in the book of Esther. Some translations will use the name Ahasuerus. That's just a language thing. It's the same person. And Xerxes is well known for his campaigns against the Greeks. Last week we kind of did fun talk about the battles of Thermopylae and Salamis, where you have these just grand epic battles between the Greeks and the Persians during the time of Xerxes, and those would have been in 480 BC. So we're already going a significant amount of time way past Daniel, and we're going to keep going. So in other words, there's no way that Daniel would know these things, but when you look at what's being described and how the history transpires, it's amazingly accurate. How about that? So you have 3 kings and then a 4th, and that's Xerxes the First, who has his great wars with Greece that are extremely well documented. The really nice thing about this is this portion of history on the secular end is extremely well documented. Now, there may be arguments about how big each army actually was. Hey, there probably weren't 1 million Persians in this battle. Somebody's flubbing some numbers. But these engagements did take place. These are real people. It's extremely well known, well documented. We then talked about verses 3 and 4, which is where we stopped last week. Verse 3 and 4 says, "Then a mighty king will appear, and he will rule with great power and do as he pleases. After he has appeared, his empire will be broken up and parceled out to the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because his empire will be uprooted and given to others." All right, so verse 2, we are in 480 BC. We're skipping ahead now several generations to 336 BC. We have Alexander the Great, who is the mighty king described here in verses 3 and 4. Alexander the Great, of course, was one of the great conquerors of the world. He puts on a campaign against the Persians unlike it had ever been seen before. I described a lot of his battles, a lot of his war campaigns. They're very swift. You've never seen such swiftness and domination in the ancient world before. It very much equivalent to the World War II Blitzkrieg. It was just so quick, just mighty battle. Again and again, he would win against the odds, and his forces move extremely quickly. They're extremely well trained, extremely well equipped, and so they would just go out battle after battle and knock down the Persians. Eventually, in 330 BC, Darius III was the last real king of Persia. There's an Artaxerxes V, but he wasn't really recognized, didn't have really a kingdom to rule. Basically, Persia falls in a very short time. Alexander, however, does not live a very long life. In fact, he dies quite young. I think he was younger than me when he died. It makes you think, I haven't really done anything. I need to go out and conquer some land or something. But he dies, and he dies without an heir, which is, of course, a problem when you are a monarch and a ruler of a great empire, because now there's no one in charge, and there's a power vacuum. So he does have some illegitimate heirs, some that are too young to reign. You have some regions that are like, we'll kind of work together, we'll keep it intact. No, everyone's got a motive here. So it breaks up into 4 kingdoms, as described in verse 4. And I'll go through these again real quickly. By the time we get to about 306 BC, it's very much broken up. You have the Ptolemaic Empire in the south. That would be, we're going to refer to it as the king of the south. We'll talk about that in a second. That would be Ptolemy. His his general there that would take over that land. That would be the lands of Egypt and like the Levant, the Holy Lands. Then you have the kingdom of Macedonia, which is Macedonia, Greece, and that was ruled by Cassander. And you had the Seleucid Empire, ruled by Seleucus, which would contain basically the area of Syria down into where Babylon was. And then Lysimachus had his kingdom in Asia Minor, which would be modern-day Turkey. So you have these four kingdoms that break up this great Grecian empire. And, well, we'll talk about what happens to them as we go. That's basically the setup for where we were finishing out last time. Now, Rome is going to get involved here and there, but Rome is kind of on a slow up and up. We're going to see it pop up again and again, but eventually we'll get to the point where Rome becomes the dominant power, but it'll be a while before that happens. I know I just kind of went through that. That's the review. Any comments, questions, anything on the history? I'll try to do my best. I'm not a professional historian, but it's going to be a lot of history. So if there's no questions, I'm just going to warn you, if you weren't here last week, we're breaking these up almost kind of verse by verse, very small chunks, not like what we've been doing in the past, so that we can have time to read the verses and then talk about what the history actually unfolded in secular history and see how that matches with Daniel's vision here. So if there's nothing else, if I can get some readers, because I don't want to talk the whole time. Someone read for us Daniel chapter 11, just verse 5, please. Just verse 5.
For I consider that I am not at all inferior to the most eminent apostles.
Daniel?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Or say that doesn't sound quite right. Daniel 11, verse 5.
The king of the south will become strong, but one of his commanders will become even stronger than he and will rule his own kingdom with great power.
Okay, so the four kingdoms here that split the Grecian Empire, these are four generals of Alexander. I mean, they'll use different titles, but that's basically what they are. So we have here mentioned the king of the south. Now, it's good to define terms, even if we're not in a legalistic setting. Basically, from here on out, when you see the phrase the king of the south, that's going to be referring to the king of the Ptolemaic Empire here. So the area of Egypt and the Levant in this kind of pinkish color, these columns here. When you see king of the south, that's who we're talking about. Now, that's not going to be just one guy and then it's going to move on. It's going to be whoever holds that position. So you see the king of the south this, then the king of the south that, then the king of the south this. It's going to be different kings of the south. It's just the one at that time period is what it's referring to. Same thing with the king of the north. You're going to see that come up again and again. And that's going to be referring to the Seleucid Empire here in this light blue. You will notice this kind of green kingdom of Macedonia by Cassander and Lysimachus's reign there in Asia Minor. They do not continue on. They basically stop right away, and you have just these two empires that are going to be next to each other for quite a while. Anyway, we'll get to that. So you have these two dominant powers that are going to rise. One is the king of the south, who is going to be strong, but then another will become even stronger, I believe, referring to the king of the north, Seleucus the first of the Seleucid Empire. That's just kind of setting the stage for what we're going to be experiencing here. So again, we're not really going to see much of the others mentioned. I'll have some campaigns we'll talk about, but the dominant powers are going to be the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, basically from here on out. Anybody have any questions on that? I want to make sure we're all clear about what King of the North and King of the South means, because it's going to repeat it again and again and again, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page on that. Okay, very good. With that then, let's continue on. Someone read for us verses 6 through 8, please. 6 through 8.
And at the end of some years, they shall join forces. For the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. But she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. But from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army into the fortress deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north.
Okay, so we have a lot of political intrigue to talk about all of a sudden. I'm sure you all have heard great political thrillers. Here's one that they haven't made a movie about yet, but I'm sure someday, because this is just incredible stuff. So we are now going to be in 249. So I'm going to skip ahead here. We're going to go down here. 249. So currently in power, we have Ptolemy II in the south and Antiochus II in the north. So those are kind of the contenders there. So Ptolemy II attempts to form an alliance with the Seleucid Empire with Antiochus II. And so he sends his daughter, very much described how it is here in the scripture. His daughter's name is Berenice. I think I'm saying that maybe not correctly, but that's what I'm going with. He sends his daughter Berenice to marry Antiochus II. Now, as you all know in your medieval histories and all that, if you want to form an alliance, the way you do it is through marriage. For some reason, that's how it was done. I mean, there's reasons behind that. I won't get into it. But so that's the idea here. Is they're going to form an alliance. They're going to work together. You know, the two great powers of the world are going to be united here. There's a little bit of a problem here with Berenice marrying Antiochus II. It's that Antiochus II is already married. But that never stopped anyone before. So what he decides to do, because it seems that Antiochus II also wants this alliance so bad that he decides, I'm going to put away my other wife. His other wife, his name is Laodice. And so he abandons his first wife, Laodice, and says, yep, okay, I'll marry this Berenice, and we'll get married. And Berenice convinces Antiochus II that not only is this marriage a good idea, but here's another good idea. Why don't you reject Laodice's sons as heir to the throne and make my sons heir to your throne instead? And he goes along with that. So all the sons he had before with his first wife are no longer successors to the throne. Now his kids through Berenice are going to be heirs to the throne instead. Now, if that's a big deal, when you just suddenly decide, I'm going to change the order of succession here, usually people get really mad about that. So this happens, and this would basically make their oldest son between Antiochus II and Berenice a claimant to both the throne of the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire. So we're talking about basically consolidation here through marriage. This kind of stuff happened all the time. It's not uncommon. So that all seems to be going swimmingly for all of them until 246 BC. In 246 BC, Ptolemy II, the king of the south, he dies. It happens. But when this happens, Antiochus II decides, I'm going to annul my marriage with Berenice. I'm going to flip back. It may be that he thought because Ptolemy II has died, that the terms of the alliance aren't going to be maintained. They're not going to sustain themselves. So he decides, I'm going to get rid of this wife. Maybe I'm going to go back to the old one. Maybe I don't like either one. It's not clear what his motive is exactly. But his first wife still is not very happy about this. Laodice doubts the faithfulness of Antiochus II and has him poisoned. She murders him with poison, and he dies. So Ptolemy II dies, and Antiochus II dies. And to continue this murder spree, basically, Laodice convinces her son, Seleucus II, go and murder Berenice and her son, so there won't be any other successors of the throne, which he goes and does. So after Ptolemy II dies, Antiochus II dies, Berenice dies, and her son dies. So that makes Seleucus II, who we have now down here, he is now the king of the Seleucid Empire because there's no one else. He's the only one who has a rightful claim, even though he wasn't supposed to be after the terms of that marriage with Berenice. So there's a lot of that going on. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
I'm just trying to get straight.
You'll find it here in Daniel chapter 11. But the events here that are going on transpire between Malachi and Matthew. In essence, these are what they call the 400 years of silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That's the age we're talking about. So when they call that the age of silence, I'm like, well, there weren't any new prophecies, but Daniel kind of talked about what was going to happen. So maybe that's not the best term for it, but it is that time period is what we're talking about.
We probably have non-scriptural records.
Oh yeah, and then that's what I'm referring to, is just historical references and documents, which are mostly pretty good. Historians are kind of like, well, maybe, like I said, maybe the army sizes are a little bit, largened for certain reasons, but these events happen. These are real people. Nothing is too out of order here as far as I can tell. And like I said, it's very well documented, but to your point, these are not really biblical sources that I'm citing here, which is why I'm not citing verses. I'm just using history and commentaries to fill this in. But you can look this stuff up. It's not hard to find. It's not like I'm telling you guys anything new that someone else hasn't figured out. Basically, I'm copying other people's notes. Plagiarism, guilty. Did I answer that all right? Okay, all right. So we've got a bunch of people dead. We're not done. Continuing down here, kind of picking up in verse 7, is we're going to pick up the next part here that we've read. So after all this happens, Ptolemy III, which is, his name's kind of cut off on this slide, but Ptolemy III is a little bit upset that Seleucus II has killed his sister, because this would be his sister because he's also the son of Ptolemy II. So he decides that he's going to solve this problem through what all men who have power solve their problems. Let's have a war. That's okay. So he has a campaign against the Seleucid Empire. He immediately gathers his armies and he heads north, and his campaign is successful. It's actually, it's surprisingly and extremely successful. Some details of it. Here's one, if you want to add to the kill count we've got so far. He makes sure that Laodice is killed, so she does not survive either. He captures Seleucia, he leaves a garrison there, and he recovers, kind of to the details of verse 8, he recovers a lot of the sacred statues and artifacts of Egypt that had been taken by the Persians way, way, way back, like 300 years prior. Basically, he's gone up and he's taking them back down to Egypt, which will, of course, kind of make him more majestic in the eyes of the people there in Egypt. And he's going to be taking a lot of silver and gold. Additionally, he's able to work out terms to receive an annual tribute of 1,500 talents of silver per year from the Seleucids. That accounts for about 10%, they believe, of the Ptolemaic Empire's income, which is kind of a big deal. That's not like a small chunk of change. So the Seleucid Empire is temporarily subdued here in this case, and kind of Ptolemy III is riding high on all of this. We'll get to more on that. I think that's about as far as we read through. Any other comments, questions, thoughts about any of that we've gone through so far? I know it's just a lot of history, I'm sorry, but I don't have as many great stories either like I did last week about Alexander's campaigns. All right, moving on then. Let's get someone to read for us chapter 11, verses 9 and 10, please. Verses 9 and 10.
Then the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. However, his son shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife.
Okay, so in an attempt to push back these Ptolemaic forces, we're just kind of continuing on from where we were. Seleucus II, you remember him, he's the king of the north. He decides he's going to fight back now. He's had enough. And he's going to launch a campaign in, actually right here, I have it marked, in 240 BC. And it doesn't go anywhere. It fails. Ultimately, what happens is the thing that kills his campaign is a storm. He has a fleet of ships ready to go, and weather kind of ruins everything and destroys his fleet. It's basically wiped out. So now he doesn't have anyone really to fight with, so he can't do his campaign. So he's not successful, as we see in verse 9. He'll have to retreat. Now his sons, looking at verse 10, this is what we're talking about. Now his sons, he has two sons. He has Seleucus III and Antiochus III. I'll just comment on this real quick. They're not very creative with names. You're going to see a lot of Ptolemies, a lot of Seleucuses, and a lot of Antiochuses. Yeah. So if you hear me saying the same names over and over, there's a reason I'm trying to do a numerical addition to that, just so we know who's who. But I know it's complicated. So Seleucus II, he has his failed campaign in 240. Going on to his sons, we have Seleucus III, the elder, and Antiochus III, the younger son. Now, they each have their own battle campaigns that they go on. In 223 BC, Seleucus III, he has a campaign in Asia Minor. Prior to him doing that, when the Ptolemaic Empire invaded and went north, not only did they take a lot of the mainland holdings that were, basically on the way there, but they took a lot of the areas of Asia Minor, which would have been along the sea, along the coast. So Seleucus III decides, well, we're going to take those away from them. They can't have those anymore. So he goes and he fights in Asia Minor, which is not going south. He goes and fights kind of toward the west. And that actually comes to an end when Seleucus III is assassinated. But he's assassinated by members of his own army. I couldn't quite figure out why that happened. Probably they were not happy about how he was conducting the war. When you don't treat your troops right and you don't do a good job and you don't pay them, usually that comes back to bite you. There are many people in Rome who can tell you about that. So he is assassinated. That comes to an end. So Antiochus III, his brother, takes the throne after that. And he has a campaign that he starts in 219 BC. And he goes through, he basically goes down south through Judea, the most direct route, the route where you're going to see a lot of back and forth. I kind of mentioned this last week. When you have someone in Syria and someone in Egypt and they're going to fight each other, guess who's in the middle? Well, the people in the area of Judea, where the Jews will be. So they're going to be very much witnesses to all of this that's going on and very much involved, sometimes not according to their own will. So he has a campaign at 219 BC, and he goes south, and he actually conquers pretty much the whole area of Judea. He conquers that whole area. He defeats the Ptolemaic forces, and he gets all the way back down to the borders of Egypt. So he's doing a good job there. He didn't get assassinated by his own men. So he's still going. And so that's, we're going to see in the next couple of verses how that kind of, we have some more things that go on. But that's as far as they get up to verse 12. Any comments, questions, thoughts?
Where's Rafi?
Well, I'm not to that part yet. Yeah, that'll be next. That's a great question. I hope to answer that. If I don't, you let me know. Anything else? Okay. All right. I'm sorry. It's history. Let's get someone to read for us then. Daniel chapter 11, verses 11 and 12, please.
And the king of the south shall be moved with rage, and go out and fight with them, and the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude. But the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemies. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail.
Okay, so again, we're kind of going run right after each other. I wasn't sure how to cut these up, so maybe these aren't exactly the best breaks, but I'm trying. So remember, 219, Antiochus III has his campaign. He goes down through Judea, gets Ptolemy pushed back to the borders of Egypt, but that doesn't last for very long. In 217 BC, Antiochus III and now Ptolemy IV, and we've changed Ptolemies now, we're on to the next Ptolemy. Ptolemy IV, they have a big battle, which is the Battle of Raphia that we're talking about there. Now, the Battle of Raphia is sometimes referred to as the Battle of Gaza, so that should give you some hint of where exactly that is. Probably Gaza. I don't know exactly Raphia. That's not one that's known to me, but with that clue, I'm assuming it's around the Gaza area, or maybe at least the area of the ancient city of Gaza. We're talking more like the Philistine city, what would have been in the past. So they engage at the Battle of Raphia, or the Battle of Gaza, depending on who you're reading from. Now, during this engagement, and this is, I talk about, army numbers, they're fluid. Some will say different things, but from what I've seen, Antiochus III has a very formidable army here. From what I've seen, he's got 62,000 infantry. We're just talking about guys on foot. 62,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 103 war elephants. Yeah, now we're talking. This is, of course, not the only time elephants are used in warfare. Famously Hannibal crossing the Alps, all that stuff. Elephants are actually used not too infrequently by people who border the area of India. That's where they're getting them from. They're not getting them from Africa. These would be Asian Indian elephants that they're using. So when your borders go kind of down to Iraq and Iran, you're getting pretty close. So through trade, he's able to accumulate things like that. So that's not like an unbelievable thing. That's like, I could see that happening. I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And again, it's not the only time we see this in history. But it's something that's certainly interesting. Anyway, so he has this, pretty great army. He's got some elephants. That's always fun. But you know what? It doesn't really help him. He fails. Ptolemy IV actually prevails. I didn't get a count on how big his army was, but Ptolemy IV wins. So the king of the south wins the Battle of Raphia, or the Battle of Gaza. And Antiochus III is forced to retreat to Lebanon. So, your current geography, Lebanon would be the area right above Israel, kind of up by the coast. So he's had to retreat quite a bit to get out of harm's way. Now, just kind of preferencing on what's about to happen, not too long from now, and this is kind of going to the end of verse 12, where it talks about he will not remain triumphant. Ptolemy IV, even though he's victorious, he's not going to live for much longer. I think it's about 6 years or so. He's going to die, and the Seleucids are going to kind of come back in. They're going to inch their way back in. So he's victorious, but it's not going to last. And in fact, there's some commentators talk about Ptolemy IV's, how his reign was pretty much troubled after this, after he wins the Battle of Raphia. He has some rebellions that occur in what we call Upper Egypt, but it's actually southern Egypt because the way the Nile flows downhill, it goes north. So there's some rebellion going on, and he has to kind of rush back to take care of that. So he doesn't remain, administering things in, the Levant area for very long. He goes back to Egypt. It doesn't go well for him. I'll just put it at that. In fact, he kind of loses some territory farther south. That doesn't really have to do anything with the Seleucids, but he's on really shaky ground. Even though the Ptolemaic Empire wins the battle, they're not really in a better situation than they were before. Their empire's, kind of on shaky ground because they've lost other territory, other places. So I don't think verse 12 is necessarily referring to that, but it seems like these things are going on in tandem that don't really help his situation. Any comments, questions on that? I know I'm kind of just throwing stuff at you, and people are just nodding and say, okay. I wish I had more verses to go through. I'm more comfortable with that than just quoting secular sources all the time. Well, now I've got to make a decision if I want to keep going or if I'm going to stop, because we're going to get to a kind of a bigger section.
Sam, where are the Jews during all of this?
Right in the middle.
So they're not ruled by Ptolemy or Seleucus?
It's whoever's in charge at the time. So typically, and this is a generalization because it does change hands a lot, typically it will be the Ptolemaic Empire that will have dominion over the area of Jerusalem, those parts. And I say typically because it's not always the case. Like when, in 219, when Antiochus comes down and has his campaign and takes over that area, gets all the way down to Egypt, of course, now they're under the Seleucids during that short time. And then when Ptolemy IV wins the Battle of Raphia, of course, Antiochus III retreats, and now they're back in the hands of the Ptolemaic Empire. I don't think we're going to start it this morning, but just a teaser for next week. In a couple of years, they're going to be back under the Seleucids. And we're going to talk about when it comes up. The history's not quite perfectly documented on this, but it's not like they're just standing by and just watching this happen. They do become involved, and sometimes that involvement is not on their own will. Sometimes they are forced into a conflict they did not want to be in. The problem is you got this empire that's based in Syria up north, and one that's based in Egypt in the south, and you're just right in the middle. So they're going to be trading hands constantly.
So are they self-governed, or are they slaves of each of them as they go back and forth?
So I'm not sure what the best term for that would be. If we go back real quick, go back to my timeline, handy timeline. Cyrus II in, I guess it's the first year of his reign, maybe it's a little bit farther back. It would be, it would be after Belshazzar. It would be 538 BC. 538 BC is when Cyrus and the Persians and the Medes, Babylon falls, and Cyrus gives the proclamation that Jews can return to Jerusalem and begin rebuilding the temple and all of that stuff. That's the first instance we see of people being allowed to return to Jerusalem. But Jerusalem is still under the jurisdiction of the Persian kingdom, the Persian Empire. We know that because if you look through Ezra and Nehemiah, they're constantly answering up to whoever happens to be in power in Persia, basically. And that becomes part of the political game, especially in Ezra, where people who are around Jerusalem, who are not Jews, are trying to make them stop building Jerusalem, stop building the temple. They're sending letters up to the king of Persia saying, hey, you shouldn't let them build this, you should stop this. And then the Jews say, hey, they send a letter up to the king of Persia and say, no, let us please build this. This is what we were told to do by Cyrus. So they continually answer to that. A slave would probably not be the best term. They would be under their rule as sort of a pseudo self-governing tributary, I guess. They probably send up a good chunk of their GDP to whatever empire is over them. But they do have their own self-rule. They have a governor, they're like Zerubbabel, people like that who are down there, depending on the time period. But they have their own leadership, but that leadership is subjected to whoever is more powerful, basically. So as you're going back and forth, so through the Persians, they'll be answering to the Persians. And then when Alexander comes in, they're under Alexander's rule, under the Greeks. And then when they break up into 4 different kingdoms, they're mostly under the Ptolemies, although sometimes the Seleucids get there, and they are under their rule. Now, that doesn't become a big deal really until Antiochus IV, which we're definitely not getting to today. We will spend a lot of time on Antiochus IV. You'll see why when we get to it next week. If we get to it next week, I'm not sure if we'll get to it next week. Antiochus IV is kind of a big deal. Antiochus IV is what a lot of people refer to as the Antichrist. He's like the worst guy ever, and he does a whole bunch of really terrible things. Of course, I've talked about that's not really the way the Bible uses that term, Antichrist, but you'll see a lot of commentators talk about that. So I don't know if I answered your question. They are sort of self-governing, but they are under whatever more powerful empire is around. So they have their own structure, their own government, but that government is subjected to whichever empire is in charge at the time. I think I answered that okay. Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Maccabees are not until later, right?
Maccabees will be, I believe, after Antiochus IV. So, yeah.
Now, do you remember exactly where on this timeline Nehemiah and Esther's work in rebuilding Jerusalem would be?
Yeah, I have it here, actually. Gotta go further back. Well, let me back up a little bit more. So Ezra chapter 1 seems to start to take place in 538, 539, that area when Babylon falls and now Cyrus has come and he's made his proclamation. So that's where Ezra begins. And Ezra jumps around. That's one of those things. If you ever do a study on Ezra, it jumps around a little bit, kind of like Daniel does. So basically from there through, Ezra chapter 7 takes place during Artaxerxes I, king of Persia, in 458, about there. So Ezra is kind of that time. So Persian kingdom is still around. Esther would be during the time of Xerxes the First, which would be about 482 BC. So she's a little earlier. Her story happens after Daniel, but before a lot of his prophecies take place. So she lives in a later time period than Daniel, but his prophecies happen after her time period, a lot of them. Well, part of chapter 11 is that, but just the beginning part. And then, of course, you got Nehemiah and his work. Nehemiah chapter 2 also, we believe, is under Artaxerxes the First. In fact, it talks about his conversations with the king about 445 BC. That's kind of a generalization. I will eventually let you all have access to this timeline thing. I'm kind of building it as I go, so I don't want to give you all something that's incomplete. But when we get through the study, I'll make it available to you all so you can kind of look through it. I think, well, the class has already come up. So we're out of time. So we're definitely not going to get any further. Any other further comments, questions, thoughts? Go ahead, Gretchen.
Trying to figure out where on the map, and it goes into calling these people the Phoenicians. And so I'm like, is that who are these people?
So Phoenicia would be the area on the coastline, kind of north Israel into the area north of Israel. I wouldn't describe them as a Phoenician people, but there was a Phoenician culture in that area. Like the area of Tyre and Sidon, that would be considered the area of Phoenicia. It would be, there would be, yeah, they would have that area under their rule. Yeah, that part is correct. Yeah, I wouldn't describe the Seleucids as that because they were far more than that. They were a very diverse. Yeah, there's a lot more land that they have in addition to that small area. Yeah, so the area of Tyre and Sidon, Tyre was extremely famous for its naval fleets and stuff, and the Bible actually talks about it ad nauseum, like all the time. When you got Tyre, you've got ships, basically. And so they'll be moving in and out of that area when they're doing naval campaigns. And we talked about last week Alexander's campaign against Tyre, building that cool causeway and all that. But yeah, there's definitely a lot going up in that area as well. Okay. All right, we're out of time. So next week we will pick up, let's see, what verse did we stop at? We'll pick up in verse 13. We got a long way to go. 11 is really long, and it's all kind of like this. So I'll be doing my best to kind of go through it as much as I can. But like I said, we'll be continuing this timeline, so we'll have more to add. Eventually, when we get to hopefully the end, you'll start to see where we start seeing Rome pop up again and again, and kind of things that are leading up to eventually Christ. That's the goal, is we're going to get to about the time of Christ by the time this whole thing that Daniel is being told is done. So with that, we're done for today. We'll pick up there in verse 13 next week. Thank you.